Mr. Drake, you have a very impressive resume. You were the senior executive at the NSA. You were indicted, and most importantly, you're a whistleblower. And I think one of the most important things you said here on stage and you whistleblowed upon was about 9/11. Can you tell us the specifics about the information that you found out about 9/11 when you were working at the NSA?
Well, one, it was a systemic intelligence failure. And NSA conveniently hid behind the CIA and FBI during the 9/11 Commission hearings, which was the independent commission, after the Congress had looked into it with two different investigations. And even they later said, some of the commissioners acknowledged that they were unable to get full cooperation from NSA, and there's still critically troubling questions that had never been answered.
There's a lot of.
So I ended up, see, this is just in the early days after I discovered myself, as well as with others who came to me in private, the NSA had critical intelligence about Al-Qaeda and associated movements in particular that had never been properly shared outside of NSA. And in part, it was an institutional prerogative where, because counterterrorism was not a national priority, to say it that way, even though Tenet had said in 1998 the system was blinking red, they simply did not share critical intelligence. And because, although they had it, and so because of that, guess what? And that includes critical intelligence about some of the hijackers.
A lot of information came out about foreknowledge that the U.S. government had. Now, you're telling me that the NSA had foreknowledge and critical information that, if would have been shared, could have prevented the 9/11 attack?
Yes, I've said that actually for quite some time now. There was an open letter, an open memo to the president that myself and my fellow whistleblowers actually published through Consortium News, and it got picked up by a number of other outlets. And in there, I actually detail, it's in quotes, I detail what the nature of that intelligence was.
That is incredible. Now, I know for speaking out, the government has gone after you. A lot of people in the mainstream media and the government are saying, with the Edward Snowden situation, that if Edward Snowden would have went through the proper chain of command, everything would have been fine. What is your response, and can you tell us about your story going to the chain of command?
Well, I'm exhibit number one, and why going through the chain of command and through all proper channels as a whistleblower, even invoking the very statute that was supposed to protect you, called the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act of 1998, simply and utterly failed. In fact, it was an exposure act. It's not a disclosure channel. All of my whistleblowing within the chain of command at NSA, within the Department of Defense, and with Congress and yet others, right, all came to naught. Because the grave nature of the disclosures went right up to and including the White House in the Bush administration. So why would they be acknowledging that they're in violation of the Constitution, which the President himself has a very special oath to preserve, protect, and defend? Right? I just have to support and defend it. He has to preserve, protect, and defend. Right? So why would they acknowledge that? Because they knew they were in violation of the law. They knew they were in violation of in partnership with the NSA. The NSA, by turning the United States of America into the equivalent of foreign nation, then they're violating with criminal sanctions the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, which has been modified 5 times up until 9/11 to keep up with technology.
The mainstream media is giving a lot of attention to Edward Snowden. They haven't given you that much media attention at all, but I know what you did in the past. It was extremely heroic, extremely brave. I know now that you also talked with Edward Snowden. Can you talk about some of the things you talked to him and about your meeting with him?
Well, it was an extraordinary moment. I mean, he's acknowledged that he was inspired by me. He saw what I had gone through in terms of working the channels. He knew there was no hope at all working with the channels. Those were entirely corrupted. He also obviously had access to information of an extraordinary nature that fully documented what many of us have been saying for many, many years prior. All I have to do is go back to my March 15th Sunshine Week speech at the National Press Club. Many people are now going back to that and saying, wait a minute, we had people within the system, people that came out of the system, people that paid extraordinarily high prices for having held up a mirror to secret power and secret government. A government, by the way, that has no inclination to follow the Constitution because it separated itself from that extraordinary document. That came into being over 220 years ago. So all this took place after 9/11, although there's a lot of things that were being put into place prior to 9/11. So Edward Snowden, a magnificent, extraordinary act of civil disobedience, said, you know what, enough's enough. The overwhelming preponderance of the evidence was this thing had so metastasized in the intervening 12 years that I'm going to go to reporters and journalists who I know and just blow it wide open.
His story is very inspiring, your story is very inspiring. It inspired me to confront General Hayden, but it's pretty clear that with everything that's happening with Snowden, with the information that you came out with, that we're pretty much in an information war.
Actually, yes, it's important. Very few people are still getting that. It is an information war. See, information is power. Information is the coin of the realm. And the government has decided in the internet age that the way to control it is to own it. Hayden actually said this well over a decade ago, that we have to own the net. Own the net. I don't think people fully appreciated what that meant. It was sort of a way in which he was flagging that we're going to do everything we can to gain access to as much data as possible, because we're in the steal the secrets business. Now, we're even including stealing anything we can get our hands on. Doesn't matter whether it's protected or not. If we can get away with it, hey, and not get caught. I mean, Hayden is an absolute violation as a military officer who had taken an oath as a military officer and the head of NSA, and then later he was the principal, the deputy director of the DNI. He was also the head of the CIA. Absolute violation of the oath to support and defend the Constitution. But in his moral rectitude, he said, I could not do it. This is like triple negative, which meant when given the opportunity to exceed his authorities unconstitutionally, he said, you know what? I'm going to do it for the sake of the nation, in secret.
It's very brave, but one thing I never thought I would ask someone who worked at the NSA before, this question, but how do we fight this information war?
Well, information wants to be free, and I've called for maximum exposure and disclosure. This has gone too far. The limits in which even executive branch executive orders are supposed to constrain even the secret side. All the oversight mechanisms have utterly failed. You only have a couple of people like Udall and the Wydens of the world and one or two others. More now because of the disclosures, who've been saying for years. They just weren't willing to go into the well of the Senate under the speech and debate clause and just speak the truth, because they knew if they did, they'd be sanctioned, and probably they would be removed from their positions. They would remain as senators, but they were removed from their positions on the intel committees, the very bodies they're supposed to oversee the secret side of the government, because of significant and ongoing and decades-long violations back during the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Mr. Drake, you're my hero. Thank you so much.
Certainly Thomas Drakes and John Kiriakou and Peter Van Buren. These are people who have all been either investigated or prosecuted.
Mr. Hayden, I do have to ask you though, I mean, why don't Americans deserve the right to privacy?
Americans do have the right to privacy.
But not if the NSA listens into every single conversation we have and records it.